Welcome everyone to our today's webinar, the second annual State of Revenue Operations Report, and real world stories and lessons learned as well. My name is Craig Rosenberg. I'm the Chief Analyst, co-founder of TOPO. This report is brought to you by LeanData and SalesHacker. So, So just some housekeeping as we have to do. So there is a recording and that will be shared with you after the webinar. There is a chat box and all the panelists will be looking at it. And if you want to let us know where you're joining from, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in the Q&A. And if we see them along the way, this is going to be a highly engaging webinar. And if you see them, we might jump in and include your questions along the way, okay? So today's speaker, so I introduced myself, Craig Rosenberg, I'm Chief Analyst of TOPO. I am the moderator today. The stars of the discussion are Evan Liang, CEO of LeanData, and Marcus Benning, VP of Revenue Ops from Outreach. But what I want to do before we go, I'd love to have the two introduce themselves to give you a good background on them before we move forward. So before we keep going, I'd like to start with Evan. Evan, could you just come on and give the audience your background?
Definitely. Hey, Craig. Hey, everyone. Really excited to be here. My name, as Craig mentioned, is Evan Liang, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of LeanData. Really always been very passionate about ops. I actually was an industrial engineer by training, so ops and process is near and dear to my heart. And over the last 7 years at LeanData, we've had the fortune to work with a lot of the leading practitioners in the ops category, which is why we were so excited to sponsor this study. And so excited to share what we've learned and really move forward the practice of RevOps, but also of ops in general. So thank you everyone for joining. I also see in the chat, Bomb. Those are one of the folks that we love working with. So glad to have you join us, Ethan, on this webinar.
Hey everyone, my name is Marcus Benning. I run revenue operations at Outreach, and super happy to be here, and thanks for joining. I'm a big fan of process. I'm also, by the way, an industrial engineer by trade, so I love seeing how things flow, and especially in the context of a high growth organization like we thankfully are. There is a ton of challenges as you look at how to operationalize growth and how to also enable the go-to-market function to be efficient. So we have been working for a while here at Outreach to implement revenue operations, and I'll hopefully be able to share some perspective in that regard. Really looking forward to this webinar. Thanks everyone for being here.
All right, so everyone can tell we got operational chops here. One thing, if you, Evan, if they have questions about the data, why don't you, as we go through, why don't you jump in on that? Depending on the flow of today. So you can see we've got all-star panelists here to take on this topic, a very hot topic, by the way. I think we would all agree. So what I want to do first is give you my point of view on revenue operations. I'll do this for over a couple slides, and we will we'll sort of set the baseline there. And then after we do that, then we'll go through LeanData and SalesHacker, their data and what they found in the study, and the panelists will comment along the way. So for us, revenue operations is the function that designs, manages, and tracks non-product experiences across the entire life cycle. So basically, you could think about it as connecting and aligning the operations function. When we think about why, right, one of the big trends that we believe is happening today, is what we're calling the revenue process. What we've noticed is that organizations want to have a conversation about how they can truly create a connected horizontal platform, right? That sort of starts at the third-party internet, right? And guides experiences across the entire life cycle. And we do that from that first engagement, even the dark internet engagement, all the way across through LTV. And goal here is to create this horizontal platform that's driving consistent revenue at scale. To do that, okay, we believe that what's happening today is what we're calling the alignment of everything. When we think about alignment, it's been a topic for years. I mean, literally for years. If you do a Google search, it's absurd how much blog content there is about it, webinars, ebooks, you name it. But we were truly thinking it was a advance, right, in the world. It was definitely innovative for us to have at least marketing and sales talk, but what we weren't thinking about it thoroughly. It was basically usually a connection between executives, right? Marketing and sales. Like if you hear people say, we're aligned, we meet every week, or, we're aligned, I get leads, I follow up on the leads. And that was a good start, right? But if we're going to think about things in terms of a revenue process and this horizontal connected platform, we need to think about the alignment of everything. To us, this idea, this manifestation of revenue operations, right, is part of this big idea where we want to take that revenue process. We want to create aligned experiences. What happens, right, along these different steps along the way? And how do we align the platform that delivers this, right? And we think of it in 4 areas. So one is, can we align the metrics? So one of the big things we've noticed is that we could go into a company that says they're aligned, yet marketing's using their system for metrics, sales is using their, the decision on aligning metrics is not just what the metrics should be. That's obviously huge, right? What are those big milestones we're going to track? But where are we going to get it? We have to align on both these things. So we have to start by looking at the entire life cycle and then aligning metrics against that, okay? Aligning operations, I talked about that. That is revenue ops, this idea that can we bring the operational, today, typically operational silos, right, together? How could we possibly deliver a revenue process if the operations is siloed? How can we deliver aligned metrics without an aligned operations function? The other two also come from, they require revenue ops to go to, how can we align the stack? We've seen this more and more. Like if you take the 2 panelists on the phone, right, they have, outreach and LeanData, right? Both of those are not, they're both discussed across every sort of operational, if you go to marketers, they know what sales engagement platform people are using. If you look at LeanData, I mean, you have marketing ops people that love it, sales ops people that love it. You could see that the stack's aligning sort of naturally, right? As we start to look at as experience start to align, but we haven't, part of this movement is to actually have that conversation and figure out what does the stack look like across the entire life cycle. And then the final thing has been very elusive is like, how can we centralize across all of this revenue process, the customer data? In order to sort of lead that, we need revenue ops to help lead that charge. So for us, we think of revenue ops in 5 buckets, right? So one is strategy and planning. It's something, we have a go-to-market plan. It's typically a PowerPoint. How do we, who owns it and who owns the planning that goes with that to get that to market? Who owns the overall revenue process? We believe that's revenue ops. Now, there are going to be people that own different segments along the way, but who's sort of making sure that everything's connected? The analytics and measurement, the aligned metrics, right? The data, who can help us think about how we're going to collect and make usable all the customer data? And as I said, the aligned, the aligned technology stack. And for us, we've seen a lot of really good things happen. Like one is, from a strategy and planning perspective, most planning exercises are locked in PowerPoint. Revenue operations that's able to look across the entire life cycle can help operationalize that, right? Moving from siloed process and workflows to seamlessness, right? I talked about metrics, functions having their own metrics, a consolidated point of view, something that we all agree on. Data management is crazy. If you look at the drawings that we have today on all our different applications in sales and marketing, we're creating multiple data sources, creating ultimately multiple repositories. How can we bring that all together? And that's something a revenue ops mindset is going to allow you to go do. So that's my sort of take on revenue operations. Before we go into the study, though, let me ask the panelists, anything you'd add, subtract, or comments you'd like to make on how I'm thinking about revenue operations?
I think we're completely aligned, Craig. I mean, I think the one thing I would add for those that are in the audience that are listening is that this is also a natural evolution in my mind for folks who are in sales ops and marketing ops. I don't want them to think that, RevOps is a completely new concept. If I'm not RevOps, this doesn't apply. I think the idea of RevOps is really around the alignment and working processes that cross sales, marketing, and customer success. But many people in sales marketing who have titles of sales and marketing ops, we're going to face the same challenges because they have to define those very similar processes. And RevOps is just is an easier way to think about it to get the organizational help to do it. But you're going to face the same challenges as a RevOps leader. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point, Evan. I would add kind of to the point about looking at revenue operations as more than a label. And if you take it from that angle, it's actually a change driver, and you could actually even add that from a certain point of view to the responsibilities that we see on the slide, right? The ability to look horizontally across the funnel enables you to take a different angle toward driving change in the go-to-market organization that the respective operations team is supporting. So if you just switch over that thought point, you have many additional points of attack or levers that you can take a look at. And so that to me, the change management aspect is very critical.
Yeah,
I like that, Mark.
Yeah, that's well said, Mark. I was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking, can you give us a little bit of perspective of how your organization got to the point of revenue operation? Did you start there? Did you guys evolve into it? Just tell us a little bit about the journey for a second before we keep moving.
Yeah, it's a great. Thanks for that question. So we started actually as sales ops. So I joined Outreach about 14 months ago, and we were sales ops. And I looked into what the team was really doing, and we were supporting the sales development, the sales, and the customer success processes. But we were doing so with a certain, I would call it a vertical mindset. And what we try to do is basically swap that around and shift that and have a more horizontal funnel-focused mindset. We call it full funnel operations, really. It's almost like our tagline that we use because we realize that in order to be effective, and you might have heard that name, those moments that matter in the overall funnel. In order to be really turning the dial, for example, on the sales development side, or even further to the left on the marketing side, you need to understand how everything flows. And that's what we've been trying to do in the last year or so. Also redefining, for example, roles, right? Instead of saying you're the sales operations manager, we're going to be a little bit more specific into touching certain aspects of the funnel, and then also having the right level of overlaps so that we have always a kind of a continuous view.
I love it. So, wow. So that's, I'm not even sure the word evolution. I'm 14 months is, well, I guess the way everyone's moving today, I guess that's amazing. You guys went fast. And so now when you talk about driving change management, it's because you said something I thought was really cool, which is like, I can facilitate and help drive that because I have what you guys are calling the full funnel view.
Exactly.
Interesting. I love it. Okay, cool. That sets the table, I think, really well.
Hey, Craig, I think we have a question live from Randy. He says, if there is no RevOps manager, but there are marketing ops people and sales ops people, to whom should this team report to? I think it's a great question. It's highly relevant for what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
So, my take on it is I think you should, every organization needs to play around with their reporting structure that it makes sense. One of the things we'll talk about later on in the webinar is having the right resources around this. And so, Randy, it depends on your team alignment at the top. It could make sense that, it could be a virtually aligned team where sales ops and mark ops still report up into the sales team and still the marketing team, but you guys meet on a continuous basis to align. That could work well for the time being until you find a RevOps manager leader, or I've seen it in the past where you maybe report up to a COO COO or SVP of Finance or CFO. So it depends on the organization. The most important thing is that those functions continue to meet on a regular basis and align and work together around processes that go across their functions. So that'd be my take, but open to Marcus and Craig, what you guys have seen.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that, Evan. The additional perspective is I would always say I report to 4 people. Technically, I roll up to our COO, but my partners in crime are every day the sales development leader, the sales leader, and the customer success leader. Rather than kind of focusing so much on what the reporting lines are, what is very important is what Evan said, which is that thought alignment that we're trying to work together to achieve efficiencies across the funnel and actually also enable the customer lifecycle to really become reality. That is far more important than reporting lines in my experience. Now, of course, it helps if you have a unified function, but I know of colleagues where revenue operations rolls up to the chief customer or chief sales officer, and it works perfectly well. The most important thing is to be aligned from a thoughtfulness perspective and trying to accomplish the right objectives together.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'd be careful if we just think of revenue ops sort of tactically as just a position. It's a methodology, a mindset. I've seen just aligned groups and centers of excellence. Like trying to move an enterprise to revenue ops is really hard, right? But how do they go do it? They create a regular cadence of bringing people together. They are focused on, how can we, let's audit the stack, right? Let's agree on milestones. And they still are in their groups, right? Until they sort of can, in the absence of having someone that's called revenue ops, these people still, are in their various operational teams, but the mindset is a revenue ops mindset. They're leading towards all of these things, and they work together. They have a charter, right, to bring everyone together. The other thing, I mean, Evan and I were just talking about this in our last meeting. It's like, hey man, if marketing and sales is truly aligned operationally and metrics, that your revenue ops, you're on your way. We gotta be. This is a journey for everyone, and like this idea of like revenue operations and full blown, moving completely over to just a very strict definition of this. We're not there yet. In the near term, let's just take these concepts, let's bring them to our organization, and let's let them exist for today in the structure that you're in until, for example, you get a revenue ops. In terms of reporting, though, I've seen it across the board, right? I mean, I just did a little panel, about 10 sort of revenue ops folks, and 3 of them reported into finance, but they would say the same thing that Marcus said, which is, I got 4 bosses, or I'm sorry, 3 bosses, right? Because they have the reporting structure, but as you said, the thoughtfulness between the different heads of sales, marketing, and CS were really the most important thing. All right. Awesome question by Randy. And Evan, thanks for monitoring that. Appreciate it. Okay, let me just see if I can close this so I can see better. Okay, so Evan, do you want to just walk through the sort of mechanics of the study? It's your guys' study. There's a couple slides here where you sort of give the demographic data.
Absolutely. So yeah, thanks, Craig. Yeah, so this is our second annual study that LeanData and Sales Hacker have partnered on to just understand the state of revenue ops. And this year we were just absolutely blown away by really the participation rate here. So we got close to 2,500 respondents. And so what you see here on this first slide here is just some high level data, your standard, hey, what are the industries that these folks who responded to our surveys were. So you can see software and services is pretty heavy, but you also have a mix of all different industries. So that's a little bit high level of the demographics. So if you want to go to the next slide, Craig.
Yep. And
then we also did try to break it down by by function, right? So, hey, are you getting it by, is it just sales? So it looks like a good mix of sales and marketing folks here and op folks, and then also by title. And then you can see it's primarily manager and director level and some VPs that were responding to this study. But we feel that this is the most comprehensive study out there. When you're looking at a lot of survey data, you're maybe talking about respondents of 100. When you're talking 2,500, this is very statistically significant. So.
Yep. All right, so here's what we'll do. Thanks, Evan. So I'll present the question. Let's look at the data, and then Evan and Marcus will provide some insights, stories, anecdotes, etc. Okay. So the first one you can see here, but I will read. I know you guys can read, but just to set the table. So do you believe the ability to deliver a seamless, consistent customer experience, so pre and post sale, is a key differentiator and revenue driver for B2B companies? So this is a big one. So 95% agree here. If you look, I mean, if you look at, you can see the chart as well. It's the colors are working in favor of this. So 95% believe customer experience is the key to unlocking growth. Evan, do you want to start with your reaction and then we'll go to Marcus?
Yeah, no, I think that this is really strong data that supports something I've been feeling for a long time. So for the folks who are in the audience, just imagine what we're experiencing on the B2C side here. I always love to use the example of Amazon, right? You go to their website, it's personalized, one click, and something arrives on your doorstep in less than 2 days. It's phenomenal. And I think B2B, we have a big challenge in that we're really lacking that. I think when you survey people about what the B2B buying experience looks like, it's nothing like that. Just imagine going to a trade show and see what happens, and then getting your badge scanned and see what happens next. So I've been on my soapbox for a long time, and I'm glad to see the data is really showing that as B2B sales and marketing practitioners, this is an area we need to focus on because people expect it these days. They expect it from their daily lives on the B2C side, and it's our job to really, as vendors, as practitioners, to deliver upon that because the expectations are higher than they've ever been before.
Marcus, how about you?
Yeah, so great comment, Evan. I would add if you look at this 95% agree rate, I would have expected 100 because it's so very important to think that way. And if you think about what that means as an opportunity for revenue operations, I would create the connection that revenue operations is the enabler to really bring the customer lifecycle thinking into the organization and project that through process alignment, through definition of handoffs, through definition of those conversion rates that everybody speaks about. But for example, if you just look at conversion rates, they don't mean much if you just extract them from the overall connection. And that means customer experience. It's also related to almost saying back to kind of the whole revenue connectedness or the revenue flow. Traditionally, you think from left to right, but what you really need to think is it's the center point where the customer decides to start a journey, especially with a SaaS provider. That's what it's all about. And then Revenue Ops has the opportunity to project that thinking into how we operate and how we do business and how we enable success for our go-to-market teams.
I love that comment, Marcus, that it should be 100%. And then that even question, should we even bother asking this question? Because everyone, that should just be a foundational assumption everyone goes in with. So I love that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think if we use this to set the table, though, Marcus said something really important, which is you can't deliver, right, the full customer experience without thinking in the world in terms of a revenue ops structure. And if you look at the quote, it actually went the other way for Franco in the quote. Revenue ops help them realize the customer experience side. So, you know, as it's a good table set, right? We all agree, but how do we go do it? Okay.
Exactly.
So here we go. Let's go see what reality is. So are sales, marketing, and CS go-to-market functions optimally aligned at your company for growth? 37% disagree. So sales, marketing, customer success are aligned to effectively deliver. So What do you guys think of this? I think this is an important conversation piece. We sort of go from, we all want to deliver CX. Now, how do we go deliver revenue ops? And then we get this number. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is, in my experience working with folks, this may be even underreporting. I think most organizations, like you said, Craig, when you started, have the the executives are aligned, right? And then as you go down and actually see how they actually work, there are challenges here. And it's a culture and a mindset and a thought set, and this is why we want to have RevOps be a change evangelist to help do this, but it's also going to need help from the top down. So I certainly know at our organization, this is a journey and we're getting better at it, but I've had to do things from a culture perspective or from a resource or executive perspective in order to drive this. It just won't happen by itself. You have to take the initiative to make this happen, and you have to work on it every single day. So,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I mean, we actually we actively celebrate those moments where we realize, hey, something is really working because we did take a horizontal viewpoint, and we had, for example, a sales development team that is kind of venturing into new markets, actually proactively reaching out to the marketing team and bringing them in without that being actually prescribed from the top. So we're seeing those things, and when we're seeing that, it becomes organic, and that's wonderful. And we actually bubble that up and celebrate that very loudly to set an example across the organization. We recently had an example where an account executive and a customer success manager, again, proactively got together and built one of the most beautiful examples of an account plan that I've ever seen. Those are fantastic examples that we want to basically just build upon. Because that means alignment is possible, and the big challenge is how to set that up for scale, and that means that's where process definition and process design comes in, so that it becomes a habit to really think in terms of that alignment.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I was going to say on this, per Evan's point, this is like, you know, a lot of people that are agreeing are probably not really aligned. You know, I have run into consistently where folks say they're aligned, but when you really dig in, that they're not, right? Because alignment is a big word. So like someone could, you know, take this and say, well, I meet with marketing, you know, but you know, the alignment. So you got 37% that really understand that no, it's broken. I'd say a strong, as Evan said, a strong amount of the folks that agree. I mean, even a somewhat agree is likely just a piece of it. You know what I mean? When we're asking the question across sales, marketing, and CS, and that's pretty elusive out there, right?
yeah, and I think per Marcus's point, you can start small, right? Build on those small wins, build up. You don't have to have perfect alignment. That may never exist, right? So you just got to build a small win, and I think the key thing is effectively deliver, right? Is to make you have to align enough to deliver your upon that customer experience and ultimately drive revenue. But it doesn't have to be perfect, but you got to make incremental improvements.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I wrote down the celebrating collaborative behavior, you know, from Marcus. I thought was a really, frankly, it was a great point and a really cool one. I love it. Marcus, were you going to say something else?
Yeah. So the other thing that comes to mind here is, and you mentioned it earlier, correct, the importance of a unified view on data, because to your point, what does it really mean when somebody says we are aligned? Well, if you start looking at the data, you can quickly see if it's really happening or not, especially as you focus on enabling scalable growth in the organization that you're a part of. So it's always super important to connect that with data, because it then also allows you to drive change because it's believable, right? So you say, okay, here's a pocket of greatness, and let's look at the underlying data, and let's take that as evidence and also as a change agent to then continue to scale those fantastic experiences. We're doing that more and more by basically providing, for example, dashboards that show that certain areas of connection between the different functions of the funnel in the go-to-market team, and we basically make it very visible, right? We're not holding anything back. so that the leaders and practitioners in the go-to-market team have the ability to actually discuss and proactively engage. If something doesn't look like it's working well, we have the data to support that process right away.
Got it. Awesome. All right. Rate the level of alignment in your company's revenue engine across 6 key areas. Okay, so let's look at these answers. We're going to have to dig in. So it's a 1 to 10 scale. 1 is least aligned. Okay, 10 is most aligned. Let's just talk through the data really quick before we dig into the analysis, just to make sure everyone's sort of taking this in. Okay, so we had folks rank right on the scale that I just described, in what's sort of least aligned. So if you looked at it, I mean, they're all very close, but data would be least aligned, right, at 5.71. And then you go across go-to-market planning, infrastructure, go-to-market strategy, measurement, lead management being the most aligned, but not by a lot, right? So, there's some really interesting things here, right, to talk about. I mean, frankly, you talk about all 6, but this was for me, an interesting part of the LeanData Sales Hacker study. And gives us a whole bunch of stuff to go talk about. Evan, you want to lead here and just give us your take on what we're seeing here?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, Craig, all of it is a problem for the majority of folks. I think data is the one that we highlight here is probably because Marcus was hinting at in his previous comment, right? I think the thing that separates operations people at its core is that they define and build process in a data-driven manner. There are other people who build processes. An executive could define a process based on what he's done beforehand or a hunch or something he's read, right? But operational folks are really around the data. And so that's where I think if you have misalignment in the data, that makes it hard to make decisions and build the best and optimal processes. And so that's generally what we see. And God knows, I think everyone has dirty data. And the one thing I would say is around the incremental objectives to RevOps is there are ways you can use your data more optimally to drive your processes, but don't wait for the perfect data. I oftentimes hear people like, I don't want to go on the RevOps journey because my data is dirty. I'm like, you're going to be waiting a long time, right? So you have to make use of what you have, but you do need to drive towards getting closer and putting these pieces in place. And then the goal is just to make incremental improvements quarter by quarter on each of these as you drive. So that's my take from what we see across our customer base. But love Marcus's perspective as a day-to-day in it. So.
Yeah, this is kind of a super interesting data set here. A couple of things come to mind. One is go-to-market planning. That's so very important, and because it all starts there, right? And by the way, I include in that the understanding and the manifestation of the go-to-market strategy. And especially in high growth companies, it's constantly a challenge because you need to drive execution, you need to support the quarterly objectives, but also at the same time, you need to constantly think how we can turn the dial into fine-tuning the go-to-market strategy and then take those nuggets or those insights into the go-to-market planning motion. So that's very critical. And in my experiences, you always tend to under-resource and under-time manage and under-plan and underestimate effectively the effort that should go into go-to-market planning. In the end, you find yourself sprinting toward the start of the new fiscal year. And that's kind of a good learning that I kind of every year the same happens, right? We start with great approaches, everything is connected, and then we realize, we didn't have the data, to your point, Evan. It is always going to be an issue. So the other thought that comes to mind is if you connect data with insights, which is actually, we're making insights a priority in our RevOps function here at Outreach. We actually recently hired a leader to look at insights as part of my team, because the data alone, they don't make much sense if you don't add the context of the relevancy for the funnel, and that means insights for us. And we want to really also visibly in the organization elevate the importance of insights to support go-to-market strategy, to support go-to-market planning. to enable us to measure the business correctly. So we actually see a lot of those things flowing into something we call insights, because again, that's where we add the valuable connectivity to the different areas that matter to the overall process. So this is very interesting because you see also from a data perspective, all of these 6 values, close to 6, right? Will be interesting to see how the next report looks, if we see anything kind of drifting and evolving over time. And final comment is, don't worry, Evan, completely aligned with what you said. Don't worry if the data is not perfect, because it will never be. It's just more about how to define processes that you proactively deal with that fact, and also drive the right level of visibility of those aspects, those issues that data bring with themselves.
Evan, before I leave this data-rich slide, any comments on what Marcus said, or any other closing thoughts here?
No, I agree, and I think we've had a number of questions lined up. One of them for mentioning was, that's okay, I think we're going to address them at the end, but I think I'd bring one in because I think it's relevant to our current conversation, which is kind of around the key examples of specific metrics we track to align around folks. There's a whole bunch. I think the metrics that I care about the highest level from a data perspective, obviously at the C level, is revenue or CAR in a SaaS business and pipeline. But I do think there are a number of different metrics at the different levels underneath. I think one that people are really pounding on these days, and I'd love Marcus's opinion, is around SLAs. People are really trying to drive towards how the speed of reaction, and obviously the faster you can respond to specifically an inbound request, the better, right? But I'm seeing a lot of folks use that as a unifying principle around that customer experience, and so seeing a lot of folks really focus on SLA. That's one I would highlight amongst the many that people are tracking out there. But maybe I'll throw that over to you, Marcus, to see what are the key metrics that you find lie most around. So.
Yeah, great point. SLA is kind of a very interesting one, and I would add to your point, there are SLAs that you establish in your company's engagement with your universe, right, with your customers and partners and prospects. For example, how quickly do we respond to an inbound lead? That's a critical metric. But then it's about, and that's also something that I think revenue operations is so very cool, because you have the opportunity to then translate those external or ecosystem-related SLAs into internal SLAs. And once you're able to do that with the right mix of process and data and metrics, then you're basically seeing real progress and additional productivity layers activated. So what we try to do is always connect kind of the reality of the business with what we can do and should do on the internal side, meaning what are the processes that we really drive. And SLAs is a key one. For example, we talk a lot here at Outreach about conversion rates, and we have defined across the funnel, as we call it, certain conversion rates, the classic MQL to SQL to sales accepted lead. We try to keep that as standardized as possible, but we want to be able to add different nuances, for example, differentiating those viewpoints by segment, by motion. What is the velocity of a purposefully driven cross and upsell motion versus what we call an organic upsell, where the customer comes to us and, for example, asks us to add more seats, which we love, but it's a fundamentally different motion from a go-to-market team engagement perspective. How do we measure, how do we define the data that we need to constantly and automatically measure the efficiency of that part of the process? Again, it's about data and context, and we're trying to kind of create those connection points to the actual revenue flow across the organization. There is a question here I see from Julie Leo, and thank you, Julie, for joining. Julie is asking, Marcus, do you use Salesforce as the master of truth for the dashboards you share across the different groups? So let me take that question first. The simple answer is yes. We have all of our operational data sets in Salesforce, and of course also in Outreach, which we use extensively here, as you can imagine. We try to, on top of that, set up a very audience-specific approach. How do we define the access to those those insights. For example, when you look at, let's pick a term, velocity. Right now, for example, we're driving a project to kind of create better visibility for the term velocity and what it really means. And we're thinking about creating a dashboard for the leadership level because the level of granularity needs to be different than for the seller. But one of the principles is when we define a KPI, which we use to measure the business and the effectiveness of our funnel, we will present it to all the different layers of the organization in a transparent manner. And what we will vary is the level of granularity and detail that we will provide to different user groups. For example, the management team, or for example, the account executive or the sales development rep. And that's an approach we're currently working on and continuously expanding. How do we make insights easily accessible in the context of the business process and the actual accountabilities that each of the role carries? And then the next question was, how did you identify the A/B go-to-market metrics to review and share? And I would understand that you mean account-based go-to-market metrics. That's a fantastic question because that goes to the point about go-to-market planning. In the planning motion, we do actively meet, and by the way, we don't stop those meetings across the different groups with marketing, with sales development, with sales and customer success to define the expectations, back to Evan's point about SLAs, that we have between the different teams. And then we define, for example, what is the reasonable metric that we want to go after as for an MQL to SQL conversion rate. And we do so in consensus. We do so with full visibility about what the data impact is into the funnel, meaning the classic question, how much pipeline do you need at the beginning of a quarter in order to feel good about the prospects of that quarter? Well, it's actually not only a pipeline question, it is actually a lead management question. And then it goes into marketing execution. So you always want to kind of try to connect the initial question with another why question, and then you add another layer of why, and then you get to the actual root cause in regards of what really generates or triggers that successful action in the funnel.
Awesome. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So do you have a revenue operations function at your company? Okay, so it's on the rise, as we can see in the data here. In 2018, 20% said yes. In 2019, 31% said yes. And if you combine that with LeanData Sales Hacker data from the last 2 years and look at being built, right, 15% now to 27%. So you've basically got, call it 58% either with it or in process. And so we continue to move up and to the right. And I think it's exciting. I don't know about you guys. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say the data speaks for itself. I won't make too long a commentary. It's definitely on the rise, and I think it's been going faster than even the folks on the leading edge are predicting. So I think this is definitely a rising trend, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, it's definitely more than a label or a cool new thing. It's a movement, right? And we saw that, for example, recently at OpsStars, which is a fantastic event. And the amount of networking that happens and the amount of knowledge sharing that happens around this topic is just exploding, which is fantastic to see. And it's becoming a reality. Back to some earlier points, the most important thing is just look at that the adoption is driven by the right approach from a mental perspective. There are different ways of making RevOps happen. But the most important thing is kind of being aligned to what you want to accomplish across the revenue funnel.
Awesome. Okay. What are the biggest challenges companies face moving to revenue operations? So there's a lot of learnings here. So this, if you think about this scale, so one would be the biggest barriers, right? So that's like, that's bad. And then 10 would be the least barrier. So the biggest barrier today, if you look at this, would be culture, Okay. They're all kind of, as you can tell, they're very close. And then the sort of least is low understanding awareness of revenue ops. So there's like the slide at, what was it, 3 slides earlier, there's a lot of data in here for you guys to talk about. I'm going to switch it up. Marcus, I'd love for you to start with your reaction, and then we'll get Evans on this.
Yeah, this is a fascinating slide because it allows you to kind of look at so many different angles, or rather the data set itself is fascinating. If you just look at leadership support, that is the most, back to the term of alignment, I think that's where you need to start. So you need to make sure that if you drive, and even if the organization that you drive today is called sales ops, and there is a parallel and very friendly marketing ops organization, and there might be people working in the customer success team to drive operational things. The most important thing is to have the leadership support and that alignment that we want to accomplish things together, because it is ultimately in the best interest of the customer lifecycle to do so. So that's a very important barrier to remove very early in the process. To me, it's actually the most important one, because you need that level of support, that level of stewardship and sponsorship across the leadership of the organization, to then put together a plan that allows you to kind of evolve from that classic vertical thinking in regards of we're sales ops and we're marketing ops and we're customer success ops, to that horizontal view of things where you really work together across different key points across the funnel. That to me personally is the most important one, the leadership support. Back to the topic of data, I don't want to belabor it, but that's also oftentimes mentioned, oh, we cannot accomplish it because our data is bad. But that's actually what revenue ops is about, right? Address that and create the context of why you have data that are inconsistent or that are disconnected or incomplete, and then build the right process wrappers, as I call it, around data to produce the context, and then also level up the ability to just look at data, from just looking at data to looking at insights. And that's a very, very important step toward RevOps adoption.
Awesome. Evan?
Yeah, so I'll just highlight one that on here that's under the resourcing tab that I'm hearing all the time today is folks are like, hey, I'm ready to adopt RevOps. I need to find a leader. Recruiting is very, very tough out there for every position. And then the one thing I would add for the audience sake is RevOps is a newer function. So you have to be creative. You're not going to find someone who's had 10 years of RevOps. That's not going to happen. So you're probably going to be looking at folks who are coming from sales ops or mark ops, who are in ops and are willing to take a more cross-functional role, or also be creative. In many ways, understanding processes is a general management thing, right? So folks who are very bright, who have great insights, who understand data and processes, those are all candidates for RevOps as well. And that's the exciting part. It's a new emerging role. So a lot of folks, there's different ways to go about and address it, and but everyone is, as we expand the industry, you're going to have to be creative in terms of finding the folks. So that's the one thing I'll add out there.
Awesome. Yeah, the cultural thing makes total sense too, right? This is change management. This is a different point of view. The other thing is, when you think about the operational silos, they're I think, Evan, when you kick this, like even marketing ops and sales ops was early in, we're still technically early in like that lifetime, yeah. Right? Just, just even the siloed ops is still, it's not nascent, but you know what I mean? It's really early. And so we train someone up to be, a marketing ops leader. And as you guys know, there's amazing marketing ops folks out there. Amazing sales ops folks, often in the same building, and in some cases not aligned. And culture could be a real factor, and can be a factor in, frankly, making good business decisions. Right? Just kind of what's available, what's happening today in the organization. So I was definitely not surprised on that one.
Yeah, I would add, Craig and Evan and everybody, I think what's also important here is where is the organization that you're part of in their growth path? What is the level of maturity? Are you a startup that is operating under hyper speed and with a lot of change? Are you a more established mid-sized organization? What is your go-to-market strategy? How does the company make money? Those things impact operational topics in general, in particular adoption of RevOps. So you could argue, well, in a startup, since it's chaotic anyway, it's going to be very easy to set up kind of the RevOps thinking. Maybe that's one viewpoint, but I would always say you need to go a little bit underneath and try to accomplish the connectivity of RevOps goals and accountabilities to company goals. That's actually very important. Could be also another barrier to adoption, because if you think that operation can operate kind of on its own, then you're going to have problems no matter whether you're marketing ops or sales ops or whatever ops. So to me, the connectedness to the actual company goals is extremely important, because that allows you to prioritize. In operations, we always have the problem that we have more problems and more projects to solve than hours in the day. So you always have to prioritize. And what really helps is to kind of have a very crystal clear connection to what the company really wants to accomplish.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, when I look at the data, one key takeaway for the audience is we're all struggling. There's a whole bunch of barriers, right? And so I think the most important thing is for everyone to commit to taking that first step. Take that first step and then build momentum in your organization. And I think the other great thing is, as a new emerging kind of category in sales ops and markup, is let's have a community. So please reach out. I think that's why Mark and I are so excited to share best practices, learn from each other. I think that's one of the things best about ops for people is we're all trying to solve problems together, and we're willing to share and help each other out. So I think this community aspect of it could be the most beneficial and really help us all overcome these objectives and barriers. So.
Okay, so Evan, I don't know if you want to comment on the report and being able to get it. I know you sort of alluded to it, that you have people reach out.
Yeah, so absolutely. So please, we have the full report with even more data and stats. So I don't want to make this a commercial for us, but it's at LeanData.com/report. It's a free report. Feel free to go and download it and look at all the data. And we would love to hear your comments and feedback on, like I said, the second annual report. We always want to make it better. So. And then, yes, this is the infomercial part of it. Yeah, we are in the space. We've helped a lot of people. We walked this thing out. Within the RevOps world, think about LeanData when you think about lead to account matching, and as well as routing. We manage really around the handoff process. So if you're struggling with the handoffs as you go across process, that's the process that we're best at managing, and that instantiates itself with both matching data and routing.
Marcus, you want to talk a little bit on this, and then we can...
Yeah, happy to, of course. Yeah, Sales Hacker, proud sponsor of this webinar and many, many others. So to your point, Evan, about community, we're so happy to be associated with Sales Hacker. It's really a great place kind of to learn, to share, to embrace newness and drive change, and also build community and actually do some really fun networking. So we're very, very happy to be associated with Sales Hacker. And Outreach, we're super happy to say we're the #1 sales engagement platform and solving the problems around funnel effectiveness for many, many of our customers. By the way, we love working with LeanData. We're also a LeanData customer.
We are an Outreach customer as well, so integrated staff.
All right, so we got that all out on the table here. So let's see. Let's take a couple.
Yeah, we have one Q&A question left. I think we've been solving them a long way. So Robert Smith, do you have a single platform for presenting data? Where does the C team go to view reports? Do they access Salesforce for pipeline and bookings, an accounting platform? If you have a single source of truth, what were the challenges in migrating to that platform? My quick answer is most of our customers have data visualization, they have BI tools. Oftentimes for the go-to-market stuff, it is Salesforce, making sure that data is pristine, and then pumping that data into different areas for visualization and slicing and dicing, or for things like if you are using Outreach or Marketo, those are also other areas of data silo sources of truth, but you want to make sure that it's aligned across the different things. But I would separate visualization from where the data sits. So.
Awesome. Well, why don't we do this on our way out the door here? Why don't I give you guys a 30-second famous last words for the audience, based on everything we took in and all the conversations we just had. If you guys wanted to leave a hopeful close for people and, what you want them to leave with as they leave this webinar, what would you say?
Yeah, I can certainly start. Thanks, Craig, for doing a fantastic job in moderating this webinar. So I would say a couple of things. One is revenue ops is a huge opportunity to drive change. I mentioned that earlier. And that's what makes it fun for me personally, because you basically touch all the different aspects of the go-to-market motion in an integrated fashion. We call it full funnel operations. We're interested in those slices of effectiveness that we see and find and drive across the funnel. And when it's really becoming interesting is when you're able to kind of create that visibility down to the practitioner level, that it really matters to understand how the customer lifecycle really comes together. I think we have, as practitioners in operations, and again, it doesn't matter if you're in sales ops or in marketing ops or in customer success ops or in sales development ops, it's about having that mindset to connect the dots and being able and being confident to ask those questions to your colleagues across the different organizations in go-to-market. In the go-to-market organizations, then that's when the fun starts. I'm super happy that we have access to those insights that are in this report, because it shows us that we're only at the beginning of what RevOps really means to modern organizations.
Excellent. Wow, I put you on the spot, and that was that was really good. All right, Evan.
I don't think I can beat that. This was a question you sprung on us, Craig, so I will validate that. For me, I would just reiterate that RevOps is a journey. We're all on it together, whether or not you're a sales ops, mark ops, CX ops, or just a leadership. And the most important thing is to take that first step and overcome. There's going to be barriers, and you're going to solve one problem at a time, and that will lead you to your final destination. And please rely on all of us as a community to share in that journey and offload that burden. So that's why I'm so passionate about this topic and love doing things like this. I've learned a bunch from Marcus even on this. We definitely did not script this, and it was just a very nice natural flow. So thanks, Marcus, for joining us, and Craig for moderating, and the whole audience for asking all those great questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I did. I learned a lot from the panelists, and I hope you did too, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everyone.